into introducing our first speaker of the morning. Brian Rich is Project Director of the Hive USA for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. I don't have to tell you how many people across North Africa, the Middle East, and other places are without infrastructure, governments, and things of that nature. Brian is a strategist and writer for executive leaders at global brands, media companies, startups, nonprofits, political, and advocacy organizations. He is the author of the book Shift and Reset, Strategies for Addressing Serious Issues in a Connected Society. Please join me in welcoming Brian Rich.
There are, an endless number of interesting business and social challenges that exist in the world today. I am working on what I will arrogantly claim is the most complex and the most important one out there, which is solving the global refugee crisis. So I run a special project of UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. If you're not familiar with UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is actually a person. The new High Commissioner was actually announced today. But UNHCR is the global agency of record responsible for people who have been forced to flee from their homes because of war, conflict, or persecution. There are refugee crises all over the world. I'll go into it in one sec. Our project is focused specifically and exclusively on the United States and how to get more Americans engaged in this. Now, I came to this challenge through a variety of things. You heard some of the things about my bio, but my background is in politics. I was a speechwriter. I was the youngest campaign manager in the country for a congressional race a long time ago when I was still young. We lost. I was in the White House. I was part of President Clinton's speechwriting team. I was Vice President Gore's briefing director. We just celebrated the 15th anniversary of the 2000 election, which is awesome, if you were part of that. It's where I met my wife, actually. We started dating during the recount. So, and then after the Supreme Court took my job away in 2000, I got into communication strategy and digital, but very quickly realized that it was not about, websites and search engines and apps and all of that stuff. It was really about behavior, and it has always been about behavior. And if we can figure out how to change behavior, we can pretty much accomplish anything that we want. What I think is really interesting is, having been at this now for a while, I don't know that we've figured out how to change behavior. I think we've figured out how to amplify a number of behaviors that we're already pretty good at, to raise awareness of a lot of things that maybe we should be aware of. But I don't think we figured out how to make things stick. I don't think we figured out how to get people to sacrifice. I don't think we figured out how to get people to take actions that are not entirely in their self-interest. And so we come at this challenge of solving the global refugee crisis as a business challenge, as a behavior challenge. So that's what I want to go through. I'm going to go through 4 things really quickly, try to leave some time for questions, et cetera. But spoiler alert, the last little piece of this is the challenge to you, right? I'm not up here to tell you all the things that we're doing, as exciting as that is, and as often as I love to talk about myself and the things that we're doing. I'm here because we don't know how to solve this problem, and I have a sneaking suspicion that some of you here, or all of you here together, and all of the people that you know and work with, might have something that can help with this. So who is familiar with the global refugee crisis? Be honest. Okay. How many refugees are there in the world? Anyone? Shout it out. 60 million. Okay, cheater. You knew that. Okay. There are 60 million refugees in the world, right? In reality, there are about 15 million refugees and another 45 million people that we call internally displaced people, people who have been forced to flee from their homes because of war, persecution, or conflict. But to become a refugee, you actually have to cross an international border. So there are 3 times as many people who have been forced to flee but haven't actually crossed an international border, right? They were in Iraq. They were forced to flee from their home. Iraq is a big enough country that they can flee all the way north, and now they're living somewhere in the mountains or in a camp in northern Iraq, but they're still displaced from their home without the possibility of going back, right? There are refugees everywhere around the world, with one exception, which is the United States. There are resettled refugees in the United States, but there are no active refugee situations in the United States, and there probably will be never any refugees in the United States. Probably not only the United States. Any prosperous democracy, is not going to allow for people to be forced to flee from their homes because of war or persecution. But the United States, has this sort of wonderful opportunity, this wonderful status. We're the largest, most influential political and economic market in the world, and we don't have a refugee problem, so we have the opportunity to help refugees everywhere else. Now, part of our challenge, right, is what has been in the news lately, but Europe and the Syrian refugee crisis, and the 6,000 or 7,000 people that are fleeing across European borders every day and have been for months and months and will for the foreseeable future. We have no idea when or how to stop that flee of humanity. But people are not as aware of the refugee crisis in Africa. There are some stories this week about what's going on in Burundi that are very disturbing. Or in Latin America, where the gang violence in the Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, are forcing particularly women and children out. We just published a report out of UNHCR last week about that, right? So in the United States, we have some understanding of the global refugee crisis, but I don't think we appreciate fully that it's truly global. And I don't think we appreciate that, in fact, the United States has a very significant potential role in solving for this problem. I also don't think people realize now that the global refugee crisis or the European emergency has largely faded from the headlines. It isn't wall-to-wall on CNN and Fox and MSNBC. Mostly it's being covered by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, an article every now and then. Obviously, the New York Times Sunday Magazine had that incredible virtual reality piece over the weekend. That was all about the refugee crisis. There are 42,000 people a day being forced to flee from their homes because of war, persecution, and conflict. Enough people to fill Wrigley Field, enough people to fill Citi Field, for those of you who are Mets fans in the room, every day. Fill it up, empty it out, fill it up, empty it out, all around the globe. And that number is rising, right? So our challenge is that there are not very many Americans who are thinking about this issue. And storytelling, the thing that everybody loves to tell me from the creative community, no offense, I'm part of the creative community, so I'm insulting myself as well. Everybody from the creative community loves to tell me, all you have to do is tell a better story. You just have to people to connect emotionally, right? People will care. You know what? People will care for like 12 seconds. And then something else will come along and it'll get displaced. Storytelling isn't enough, right? The other problem is that once we are able to motivate action, first of all, only a very small percentage of people in the United States actually commit to some kind of social issue. Maybe 10 million people in the country are giving philanthropically, right? There may be as many as 20 million who are willing or able, right? We're a nation of 320 plus million people. So we could optimize and get as many of those 10 to 20 million people to take action as possible, and we still would barely make a dent in this or any other crisis or cause that exists in the world. So our focus is on the other 300 million, the rest of the country, those who are not informed, engaged, motivated, taking action, or contributing in any way, not just financially or with some sort of, passing along, sharing of stories, but actually contributing their expertise, their knowledge, their ingenuity, the things that America over-indexes on to solving for this crisis. So first part of what we do is we're looking at reach very differently. We have taken and worked with the team that did the very sophisticated individual level predictive modeling that fueled President Obama's successful 2008 and 2012 campaigns, now feeds Target and Amazon and a lot of other companies. We worked with them to create individual models of all 280 million adult consumers in the United States. We know more about most of the people in the United States and what is likely to trigger their behavior than they probably know about themselves, right? And the good news is it shows that there are many, many, many more people than those who are taking action, than those who are raising their hands, than those who are do-gooders, self-identified or otherwise, that exist and could be persuaded to become involved and in some way contribute meaningfully to this effort. Now, that's not a hard number out there, right? Because they're not raising their hand. We're not activating them in some meaningful way yet. But we know that there is the possibility to go get more of that 300 million that has never been engaged and isn't self-motivating to take action. Second part of our challenge is that the way the nonprofit community talks about the global refugee crisis is terrible. Cry and buy, hope and horror, right? Let me tell you about this horrific situation that this innocent person had to go through and what they had to flee from. Wait, let me tell you about this incredibly uplifting story of this kid that we've, managed to get a book to or back into a small schoolhouse somewhere in a camp in the middle of nowhere, right? And you're like, oh, that is awesome, right? And then you move on. It doesn't stick, you don't understand it, you don't know what you can do, and it sets up a dynamic where we have a basically unsolvable problem, right? So once we figure out how to reach more people and the new persuadable right people, we have to reframe this whole conversation. It can't be about hope and horror. It can't be about simple solutions. It has to be about something that resonates with the American public. And one of the things that resonates with the American public is whatever it is that I'm interested in. We are a wonderfully narcissistic, self-involved, self-motivated, totally cushy society. Not apologizing for it. I exist within that society. I go back to my family on the Upper West Side, and I assure you we're very comfortable by comparison to the 60 million people that I am trying to figure out how to get Americans to motivate to help, right? I don't give to charity any longer because I am so unmotivated by the cry and buy, hope and horror dynamic. And I am devoting most of my professional life to trying to solve these complex problems. What do you think it's going to take issue-wise and explaining-wise beyond storytelling to get the other 300 million involved? Then we have to connect and we have to have people engage. These problems are not going to be solved because of one simple action. They're certainly not going to be solved tomorrow, right? We can't provide a blanket or a bottle of water or a temporary shelter or even asylum to the number of people that are out there that need help instantaneously, overnight, right? This is going to take decades, generations potentially to solve. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't start and dramatically transform our approach to doing it today, but engagement has to be sustained, and it has to be scalable, and it has to be meaningful, and it has to be, distributed, and that gets into activation. The nonprofit community only asks people to do two things: give us money, or maybe sign a petition. Which we all know, right? Everybody knows that signing a petition is really just a list-building exercise, right? Nobody listens to the petitions. Members of Congress don't care all that much about the petitions. I mean, they're interested. They're good public servants. I'm not, right? We need to figure out better activations. This is a business challenge. This is a product challenge. This is a marketing challenge. It's also a political challenge and an economic challenge and a social challenge. But at its core, this is a behavior challenge. So when we launched this little Hive project, this special project of UNHCR, we said we have to rethink everything about the way that NGOs go about talking about and engaging people and activating people around the refugee crisis. So instead of telling stories, which UNHCR, our benevolent overlords out of Geneva, do very well, which are domestic bosses out of USA for UNHCR, of which we are this special project, do all the time, and they raise some money and they get some attention, and the press covers it and it helps a little bit, right? We don't do that, right? We're focused on four things. One, media. The number one thing that people do in the United States, what they consume, what they share, and what their behavior is influenced by is information. Right? Comes in all sources. This is little m media. Not big M media, CNN or the New York Times. That reaches a certain number of people, largely the informed and engaged people. We're talking little m media, the information, experiences, and stuff that drive every day all of our behaviors, right? So we are in the media business. So much so that we are producing a magazine. We will publish our own magazine. We are producing endless amounts of, all sorts of content tailored to different audiences, figuring out what it is that's going to motivate, all of it, data-driven and, sophisticated, multi-platform, all of those buzzwords, right? We're in the media business. We're in the culture business, right? There's a certain amount of influence that marketing has, right? We all know that. But we also know that we watch a lot of television, we read a lot of books, and we see people wearing something interesting, and we're like, ooh, I kind of want to be interesting too, so I'm going to wear that, right? Pop culture has huge influence over behavior. In fact, if you look at something like gay marriage in the United States, the timeline for going from a largely intolerant national society to a legal and political and popular endorsement of the idea of gay marriage was so much more condensed than any other social movement that we've seen in the United States probably in the last 2 centuries. And I would give the majority of credit to Will and Grace and Modern Family because they normalized the idea of gay culture to a lot of people. And if you look, and there are some academic studies on this, if you look at the trajectory of the gay marriage conversation, when Modern Family went into syndication and got played 100 times a day on the USA Network and everything else, the speed with which people all over the country, in the flyover states, in the red states, in the places, the pockets of the country that were intolerant, started to melt away. They started to change their views. You can correlate it. Because if you watch Modern Family, do you watch Modern Family, right? Mitch and Cam are just as dysfunctional as the rest of us. They planned a wedding, and the fights that they were having about their wedding sounded an awful lot like the fights that I had with my wife when we were planning our wedding. Oh, except they're gay. Oh, wait, so they're not actually any different. So why can't they marry? Why can't they fight like the rest of us? That's cool, whatever, no biggie. Doesn't affect my life, right? Television did that. So we're writing television treatments. And on the flip side, who watches Homeland? Anyone watching Homeland this season? Did you see the first 3 or 4 episodes of this season? The Hezbollah terrorist attack in the UNHCR-run refugee camp? That does nothing good for the image of people in the United States understanding the plight of refugees, right? I assure you that the 6,000 to 7,000 people flooding across the European borders are not terrorists. That refugee camps are not training grounds for the next ISIS, right? But Homeland, because it's a great story, seemed to suggest it was. And so the 1 million or the 1.5 million or the 2 million or the 3 million people who saw that, when they think about the refugee crisis, right, we got to dig ourselves out of a hole. We're also looking at products, right? About $350 billion a year is given philanthropically in the United States, like I said, by about maybe 10 million people. Half that money is probably given by Gates and Buffett and Sean Parker and a bunch of other very wealthy and very generous individual philanthropists. Right? That $350 billion is 2% of our GDP. That number has been static since the 1970s. Right? That's pathetic. But trillions of dollars a year are spent on shoes and jackets and hats and music and stuff. Right? I don't know that I can convince average, everyday, normal Americans to become do-gooders. I don't think that people actually want to buy a pink-handled ice cream scoop or a pair of shoes that's really a crappy pair of shoes, even though it goes to someone on the other side of the world who doesn't even have a crappy pair of shoes. We just want to buy stuff. So what if we had data and intelligence and understanding for what products we needed to develop so that you would just buy it? And we would make our money on the back end, or we would get our data on the back end to understand what it is that we could figure out and use to motivate you to take other actions. So we're in the product business, and we're in the intelligence business. We're sitting on some of the most sophisticated data having to do with how people feel about not just the refugee crisis, but a number of different social issues. Everyone's familiar with the concept of cause marketing. People are more likely to buy from organizations that do something that's good for the world. He was just talking about how companies want to be in the business of not just being the best in the world, but being the best for the world, right? We have data that can help every single brand and technology company out there get smarter and do a better job, not just developing tremendous products, but marketing to its audience and motivating people to take action, right? So yeah, we're affiliated with a nonprofit organization, but we don't want some insufficient amount of money. We want your intelligence. We want to provide intelligence to you. We want to solve these problems together and tap in to the data information and the intelligence and the ingenuity and the R&D capabilities of all of these companies to solve both the global refugee crisis and the engagement challenge that exists in the United States. Because if we can solve the engagement challenge that exists for what we're doing, I assure you it's going to make it much easier to motivate someone to go buy a soda or a coffee or a car or anything else. Behavior is behavior. Humans are humans. We're all targeting the same people. We're all trying to get them to do the same things. Part with their money, part with their time. So here's my challenge and where we need help. 3 things. Do you know how to get more Americans to engage? And let me be clear, I'm not talking about a higher percentage of the people who are already self-identified, self-motivated to do things that are good for the world. I'm talking about all of the people, the vast, vast majority of Americans who aren't giving to charity, who aren't voting, who aren't reading the newspaper, who aren't having conversations about the global refugee crisis, even though it is an economic and security imperative to every American and anybody who has connections to any of the countries around the world that have refugee crises, either because people are fleeing or because they are being fled to. Right? Do you know how to get those people to engage? I think we do. I think you do. Because there are a whole lot more people who drink Diet Coke or go to a movie or buy a car or buy a pair of Nikes or log on to Facebook or any of those things than who give to charity, than who care about or understand or are knowledgeable about the global refugee crisis. You know, what should we produce? What products will people buy? And how do you sell it? Right? I don't know that there's a product out there that, you know, has the personality profile of a global refugee. Closest I've come up with is shoes, because when you flee, vast majority of it is done on foot. So all of these refugees are wearing shoes, right? But I don't think people want to buy a blue pair of shoes because it might help a refugee. And by the way, the global refugees, they don't need shoes, right? So it's not some one-to-one model. It's not exactly like Red, you know, where you buy an electronic or something and, you know, it's branded and it helps raise awareness. Like, that's useful, right? But that doesn't solve our problem, right? We need money, we need leverage, we need ingenuity. All of the refugees who are flooding out of Syria, they all have cell phones, they're all connected, right? Maybe they don't have chargers. Maybe they don't have mobile internet. Maybe they don't have the ability to figure out what the safe routes are or who to trust and who not to trust. Maybe they don't know where to register so that they can be protected and supported by UNHCR, right? These are the product challenges that we need solutions to. And in the United States, what are the products that will just get somebody to engage? Right? What are the products that people will buy? We'll make money on the back end. We'll strike a deal. We'll give you data. We'll help you figure out how to sell more jackets or hats or get more people to your movie because we know things about people that you don't know, and when we mix up that data, it's going to be really interesting, right? But we don't know what to build. We don't have a movie to send people to. We don't have a car for people to drive, and that's not our business. So what should we create and how do we sell it? And then what aren't we even thinking about? Right? We can't solve this problem by going, lots of refugees flooding across a border, we should stop that. Right? We need to get upstream of these problems. Lots of Americans not engaging. That's been true for a long time. I've been working on this kind of challenge for a long time. Right? So I'm telling you, more awareness will not solve this problem. Storytelling alone will not solve this problem. Celebrities will not solve this problem. Let me say that again. Celebrities will not solve this problem, right? Cry and buy, hope and horror, that dynamic will not solve this problem. So if we take all of those things off the table, nothing else has been tried. Everything else is in play. So what do you know about everything else about consumer behavior, about corporate behavior, about product development, about marketing, about, you know, the way people learn, what gets people to act, what gets people to part with their money, what gets people to spend time, what gets people to share information, not publicly in some weird, like I put it on Facebook and nobody sees it because the algorithm doesn't quite reach everybody and I have a million things running through my feed, but deliberately, right? What gets 100% open rate on an email, aside from that email coming from your spouse? It's a little tip. If you don't open the email from your spouse, very problematic, 100% open rate. Anybody who's married, I guarantee it. Not true for a boss, not true for an organization, not true for a brand, nothing, right? How do we take those things that you know and transform not just the global refugee crisis, but the way that we go about solving these complex problems? That is the challenge that we're trying to solve. That is the challenge that I'm here to ask your help, beg, plead for your help. And here's the last thing I'll say, right? The great thing about this little project that I have is we're funded. UNHCR gave us money. This is not some do-gooder, will you please donate a little time to redo our website kind of ask, right? This is not we're a poor nonprofit organization, right? We have enough money right now that we can work with the best and do the most interesting things. But we're not spending money on stupid ideas and things that will not move the needle. We're investing like any intelligent startup, any intelligent accelerator, any intelligent incubator of the types of things that we think have transformational power in getting more Americans to engage in this crisis. We also have, because this is a global crisis that matters to a lot of people, a not small community of very wealthy, very generous people who are desperate to invest in new and dynamic and transformative and innovative solutions to the complex problems that exist in the world, right? This is the great business challenge for the next some period of time that sounds impressive, right? So I am here inviting, asking, begging, pleading you and all your colleagues and all of your clients and all of the people who you know who are smart and curious and creative and savvy, let's apply the expertise that we have, the passion and interest in just doing the coolest shit in the world, and actually put it to a use that may have the ability to save or protect the lives of literally tens and soon hundreds of millions of people around the globe. So that's what we're doing. Questions, thoughts, vehement disagreement? Anyone want to say we can't solve the problem? Dare you, come on. Anything? Yeah.
So I read your last book, and you say that all these actions that from nonprofits can make people run out of patience because they don't see the result of they don't see outcomes. At the same time, as a creative agency that I work for, we see challenged by trying to use the same images that can create empathy, and they also create some kind of fatigue on people. Mm-hmm. And what is your take on how effective those images trying to generate empathy? I know the short term that you just mentioned, but I'd like to know your take.
So it's a great question. So there's a couple things I would say. So first of all, right, I am by no means like a brain expert or scientist, but I'm smart enough to know that there are two parts to the brain, right? There's the little part of the brain in the front, the amygdala, that responds to all the emotional cues, everything from fear and happiness to sex and whatever else, right? And constantly we, particularly in the marketing community, are bombarding that very little part of your brain with image after image and emotion after emotion, and it flares up for a couple of minutes and then it dies down. It flares up and it dies down, right? That part of our brain, first of all, is sought after by everybody, but it also, it gets tired, right? We get desensitized to these images. We've all seen horrific images of, in the refugee crisis context, people drowning and the thing that seemed to galvanize a ton of attention back around Labor Day was the kid whose body washed up on the shore in Turkey, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is horrific, right? This kid, this innocent child was, drowned, escaping, and, smugglers and all of that stuff. If you widen that frame out, the body of his sister was about 5 feet away, right? 71 people died about 3 days before in the back of a refrigerator truck when a smuggler brought them, right? People are dying every day. And that image caught everyone's attention for a few minutes, got wall-to-wall coverage, raised a little bit of money, and now, isn't there anymore. So we've seen it all. There is no more horrific situation that exists in the world that we haven't seen, right? Gun control, right? How many more people have to die? How many more children have to die? How many more schools have to get shot before we pass gun reform? No, it's way more complicated than just connecting to the empathy. So the other part of the brain, the much larger, more functional part of your brain, is the part that remembers and understands things. And it's all these little nodes, right? And that's how the internet is organized. And I'll give you the example of this, which is, anyone ever bake cookies like with their mother when they were a kid? right? The brain works in a way so that if you smell chocolate chip cookies and you have a fond memory of baking cookies with your mother 20, 25, 30, whatever years ago, when you smell chocolate chip cookies walking down the street, your brain goes, cookies, mom, really fun experience, boom, right? And a memory pops in, right? That's the part of the brain that we want to get into. That's the part that we want to rewire, the part where people understand on an intellectual level, not just an emotional level, not just on an empathetic level. The other thing I would say is those images work, but only for the first part of this challenge, which is awareness. Right? When I asked who knew about the refugee challenge, almost all the hands in this room ran up, right? You're all aware of the fact that there's a global refugee crisis. How many of you are donors? How many of you spend any time at any point during any day or week talking about the global refugee crisis to anybody else? Anyone? 1, 2, 1, thank you for that, appreciate that, right? I work in this field and I even don't do it, right? Because it's awful, it's depressing. Awareness is not our problem. Awareness can be bought, awareness can be generated. Celebrities help with awareness. It's knowledge and understanding, it's ongoing and sustainable engagement, and it's distributed action, right? And here's the last thing I'll say, because the thing's flashing at me, right? I spend a lot of time studying sports fans and disaster preparedness. Because sports fans and religion, for what it's worth, but I like sports more than I like religion, so I study sports fans, represent the core set of behaviors that are more reflective of who we are as human beings than anything else. Our greatest passion as diehard sports fans, and it's not everybody, there are lots of casual sports fans as well, but diehard sports fans act more like who they truly are as human beings in that context than at any other point. And when a disaster strikes, watch. All of the racial and economic differences, all of the, Brooklyn's not as cool as Manhattan, or vice versa, like crazy stuff that we talk about, like when nothing wrong melts away in a disaster, right? We are back at our core as human beings. And when we see human beings acting at their most core, we see the potential for them to do things that are really constructive and really important and could be applied to solving these complex problems in the world, right? So these emotional images will get us awareness, and then the awareness will die down, or it'll be an arms race against awareness for every other cause and every other issue and every other show the Kardashians do and everything else that galvanizes our society in some way. The question is can we get into knowledge and understanding? Can we keep people engaged and incrementally more so engaged, so at the point that they have the ability to take action and do something that is meaningful or constructive, they're prepared and they're trained and they're capable of doing it. That is the challenge. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. Not just in the idea of social good. I don't think we've figured that out in marketing. I don't think we've figured that out in our lives. If we did, then we would be way more prepared for disasters. And we would be much more rational in the way that we operate as human beings and as sports fans. But we haven't figured it out. And so that is our challenge. But I think in this room and in our community and our universe, I think we actually have a lot of the ingredients and the pieces. They've just never been applied in this kind of way. So, challenge issued. There's like 200 people in the room. I look forward to getting about 200 email addresses saying, I think I can help you solve this challenge. And if I don't, I'm coming back and I'm going to be very disappointed. Thank you very much.